It's Aola, this is VJ, and I'm here with yet another Headspace conversation. Now, we started this off by giving the primal, eternal role of South Africa's GOAT to none other than Ulinda Mkhize. And word's been going around of how we consistently continue this tradition of South Africa's GOATs. And for me, the next step might be surprising for y'all, but it's very natural for me. I'm here to argue that Mduduzi Shabalala, Indozi, Khotoba, Inkalakatha, the tornado that gave us a whirlwind of absolutely great music, impact, and sentiment as South Africans, is a GOAT. Now, I know the first point that heads are gonna rush on me with was, this man is a Kwaito artist. How can you put him up there as a rap great? That's exactly it. Rap, rhythm, and poetry. In some of our last installments, we've been emphasizing this fact that rap predates hip-hop. The culture of hip-hop, which emanated out of the Bronx, is not older than the tradition of having rhythmic, poetic performance and prose as part of our culture as an African people, or just as an indigenous people in general. So again, the argument is Mandoza is definitely a rapper. And how could you argue with that? That gravel voice projection into every song, that authenticity. Here's a man, a Soweto Zola, who comes through openly influenced, mind you, by hip-hop acts. You do the research. This is something that is not much of a secret. We saw the aesthetic of Mandoza, and if you're a hip-hop head, it might have channeled a little bit of a DMX. It might have channeled a little bit of an Onyx. And you might be correct, because members of Cheese Corp have notably mentioned the fact that they were heavily influenced by both acts. See, what you need to understand is that early South African township culture was cultivated a lot by hip-hop culture, because again, this is the mirroring of a conversation between black people all over the world and their struggle. So naturally, Mandoza was definitely influenced by hip-hop. You could feel it in his cadences. You can feel it every time he did a verse, because he actually was one of the few Kwaito artists who relied on more than a hook to sustain a song. Mandoza had 1-2 verses besides the hook holding him in. Mandoza had double entendres. Mandoza had punchlines. On a technical level, we can't be arguing the fact that Mandoza was an MC, a mover of the crowd, somebody who directly took the influence of hip-hop. And what makes me put him in this GOAT conversation is that he was one of the earliest to show us how we can take rap music and make it ours. He showed us how, number one, hip-hop has always been about taking the lowest of the low and making them feel good about themselves. Y'all think Mandoza was just talking about himself when he said, "We Inkalakatha, we Tornado, we Khotoba"? If you follow his catalog, right from his first project, 925 Zone, you'll find that Mandoza has had a consistent streak of being a community-orientated artist. Indoda ingawa namhlanje kusasa iphinde ivuke. Hloniphi life boy. Mandoza's moral message never lagged. Here's a guy who gave the brothers in the street anthems to feel good about their masculinity, who gave the sisters on the street anthems to feel good about their femininity, who gave the township as a whole messages and positive upliftment. And this is one of the first salient things that I respect about Mandoza, his emotional depth. He gave us songs which were about the party, but which underneath had that positive, uplifting, socio-economic drive to say, yo, Ndomnyam, you can make it at the end of this. You can make it. And if we're talking about consistency, the man has more than a 5 catalog breach of giving South Africa some of the greatest anthemic pulses ever. Again, I'm reiterating, Galagato, Tornado, Khotoba, 50-50. Mandoza was able to collaborate with other artists yet still hold his own lane consistently through every era, interpreting his sound for each generation during the early 90s to the mid-2000s. This was a guy who held his own and remained a king in his lane, and everybody respected Mandoza for what he did and how he did it. And we can't talk about Mandoza's sound without talking about Gabby Leroux, because what makes Mandoza's sound also very special is his partnership and his chemistry with Gabby Luru. Gabby, being the eclectic Africano producer, gave Mandoza beats that could transcend Ikasi. I mean, we could show none other than Ukhodoba, Nongalagata for those kind of examples, especially Ungalagata. Name me one joint which crossed over into South Africa's well-known, stiff and stringent and racist white population like Ngalagata. Name me a song that could have the Braai stand over the Afrikaans space and Imbadla over the black space, and equally bring those two people together symbolically in song and in message than Ngalagata. So I think we highly underestimate Mandoza, because for the longest time pop culture put him out as this kind of basic township black man with a lack of articulation. He didn't speak good English, and sometimes we have this anti-black degenerative tendency of relegating some of our most important social activists as just regular township objects, simply because they do not match up to some of the standards of what we consider global or sophisticated. And I'm here to fight for that. I'm here to fight for the fact that Mandoza's personality was the epitome of what you can do when you come from South Africa's most marginalized, but you have a vision that is broader than the limitations of what apartheid or any kind of oppressive structure could do to you. If we're talking about mass appeal, we all know who Mandoza is. If we're talking about consistency, he's grown throughout the years up until he left us in 2016 due to illness. We all mourned him. This was one of the few artists whose death was important enough to be projected across the whole country. Because all of us, if you're born in the 80s and the 90s and even the late 2000s, because I mean his message has resonated even after that, Mandoza is part of the South African pop culture DNA. So if we're being honest with ourselves, why would we not put this man as the greatest of all? The most fundamental aspects that put Mandoza in the GOAT conversation to hip-hop heads in this conversation is the fact that Mandoza could even b-boy. Ichis Gop were b-boys. If you remember the videos, if you remember the shows, I remember a show that I was in personally. Who remembers Telkom Park PE? This is the 90s. I'm carried by my brother on the shoulder. I'm watching Mandoza drop, flipping, doing grandstands, and that for me was powerful because I saw two worlds merge into one. I saw the American world that I was associating with Wuniga and this kind of pop understanding of what Afro-Americanism is. And I saw the guy, I saw a dude coming through, doing his thing, being merged into one thing. So we don't give Mandoza and Chiscop enough credit for taking aspects of the hip-hop culture, for taking rap, for taking b-boy, for taking a lot of the aesthetics. Mandoza would rock up in baggy jeans. Mandoza would rock up all blinged up. The hip-hop aesthetic was there before this era of hype beasting and trap. There were South African Kwaito artists who were unashamedly imaging themselves after rap artists. So come on, that's one thing we could argue. He's undoubtedly a rapper. He's undoubtedly been consistent. He's undoubtedly had the mass appeal. He undoubtedly gave us a lot of technical prowess. Come on, man. Look at the way Mandoza structured his verses. Hloniphi life boy, hloniphi impilo boy, hloniphi unito nonyobo. He was the epitome of how you can take simple messages and translate them in a way which could appeal to everybody, but which could relate to the instrumental like nobody could. I still have that verse from 50-50 in my head. This is Mandoza with every line. It was cool and suave, but also there was the message there. Come on. And so ultimately, if we're looking in retrospect, if we're looking at how South African hip-hop, South African rap music has cultivated artists who have been proud of themselves, who have been able to generate originality, that's another aspect, super important. Mandoza reminded us of X. Mandoza reminded us of Onyx. Mandoza might even remind you of Tupac, because the image of the bald-headed, rugged, motivational African rapper really casts forth those kind of messages. But if we are to be frank with ourselves, he was able to draw from all of those influences and give us something which was authentic. Authentic enough to have Ja Rule and Murder Inc. literally bite Inkalagata and translate it as New York. This was an artist who had global appeal in a time where South Africa might have not known the importance of that. And maybe we didn't have the kind of technology that would have pushed an artist forward like that. And I argue that if Mandoza was an artist in the SoundCloud era, his name would be ringing. He'd be on Sway in the Morning, giving you a freestyle. He'd be on BET. He'd be the kind of artist we could be proud of on a global level. But you have to understand, the time makes the man as much as the man makes the time. An era that an artist pops in really determines the trajectory of how and when and the style of the blow up. And I think that Mandoza is an example of an icon in an era where the world couldn't appreciate him because maybe SA or the world as in general couldn't facilitate that kind of dialogue. But yeah, Duduzi Shabalala, Mandoza, if you asked me, is he the greatest of all time as a rapper? I'd definitely say Navanjani. Because if we're looking at the evidence, if we're looking at just the indubitable facts, this was a rapper for us, a rapper by us, and a rapper who remains eternally made through the South African spirit. So that's what it is. Talk to us, talk to me. Let's keep the conversation flowing. We started off with Linda Mkhize, and there's no other place I would take it to other than Mandoza. Because again, the headspace is about the South African hip-hop story and emphasis on South African. How can we bring ourselves forward to the world and translate what's special about being from Mzansi, from Eningizimu Africa, in a way that the world can appreciate? And as this GOAT series moves on, the people who we can even call the greatest of all time or the greatest of a time have to at least match that kind of qualification. A GOAT is somebody that makes the world take notice. Take notice of a particular space, take notice of a particular time, and take notice of a particular era in ways that continuously live on. And today, if you could pop Mandoza joints back and forth, you still have the party bumping. So for an artist who could live that eternally, for an artist who remains relevant even beyond the grave, blessings. We're thankful. Shout out to Ndoze.
We all gymnasts, but Tina Bestan must put me gyming. See, so little music. And our coach, it was the best guy. Hip hop, Unati, Upemba, Mizuna Taraja. He was always there. Uskai village into anything. And like Simbiza, King Don Fire. He was a sikas. Yeah, I get Muto Matulanga, most of my teach, I guru. Yeah. So, Midawami no Mandoza, no SP Place, Usike, Hurmangandos in the Shama Tanda Soke, that was my brother, he out here. So, those in the Woodman Pelichi, Tina stand bloody music. And the courier to Pem Weber, as Boleva Matia, mixtape, or my cassette, the time Abu Keres Wani, Abunuti by nature, Tina Bestandi Onyx, Abu Freddy Foxy, Abu Chris Crossy, the old hip hop generation. But Tina Bestana tape and didn't know how to get them, but this one Bolega Guyo. Into Airslika cool no Mandoza. One day I borrowed him cassette lamb, 9mm Keres one.
Ah, Keres.
Yes. Mangfika ingambukile lelo cassette. So ngifike kuwo ngithola umkhulu wakhe umkhulu khona umduduzi abambiza uThemnkosi lapha. Abuye nalo cassette lami ngambukile ngithi cassette lami ngambuka kanjani mfethu. Kanti unamanga lo mfethu ukhiphe yazi kudala besenzana iTDK
iyavula.
Ulivula ukhipha amathumbu ufaka amanye.